The night it happened began like many others on the frontier, quiet on the surface but heavy with the kind of silence that only comes after a long day of dust, sweat, and unspoken worry. The wind moved low across the plain, carrying the smell of dry grass and old wood, and the last light of the sun slipped behind the hills as if it did not want to see what was coming next. In towns like this, nothing ever felt accidental. Every closed door, every dim lantern, every footstep in the dirt seemed to be part of a larger design, even when no one could yet see it. The boarding house stood at the edge of town, a narrow two-story building with tired walls and a roof that creaked when the wind pressed against it. It was the kind of place travelers stayed when the trail ran out and the night left no other choice. Inside, the air smelled of lamp oil and boiled coffee, and the floorboards remembered every boot that had crossed them. People did not come here for comfort. They came because they had to. On this night, two strangers arrived with the same need and very little patience for one another. The man came in first, hat pulled low, shoulders tight from weeks on horseback. He carried the look of someone who had learned to rely on no one, a cowboy shaped by long miles and harder losses. His coat was worn thin at the elbows, his boots scarred by work and weather, and his eyes held the calm of a man who had seen trouble often enough to stop flinching. He was not looking for company, only a bed and a few hours of sleep before morning demanded something from him again. The woman arrived just as the lanterns were being lit. She stepped inside with careful strength, the kind that comes from standing alone longer than expected. Her dress was plain, travel-worn, and dust clung to the hem, but she held herself straight, as if refusing to let the road take anything more from her. She had not planned to stop here. The storm gathering outside had made the decision for her. On the frontier, plans were fragile things. The keeper of the boarding house looked from one to the other, then back toward the narrow hallway where the rooms waited. His face tightened, and he cleared his throat in a way that told its own story. The town was full. A cattle drive had come through late, and every spare bed had been claimed. There was only one room left. One bed, one night. The words hung in the air heavier than the dust on the floor. The man shifted his weight, jaw set, already ready to turn back into the dark if it meant avoiding trouble. The woman's fingers tightened around her small travel bag. She had walked too far and lost too much to risk the road again after nightfall. Outside, thunder rolled low and distant, promising rain that would turn the trail into a trap. They did not look at each other at first. Pride kept their eyes forward, fear kept their feet planted. Sharing a room was not done lightly in these times, especially between two people bound by nothing but bad luck and necessity. The boarding-house keeper waited, knowing the land would make the choice if they did not. At last the woman spoke, her voice steady but quiet. She said it was only for one night. The man nodded once, not trusting his words, not trusting himself to say them right. An agreement was reached without warmth, without comfort, sealed by the simple truth that neither had another place to go. The room was small, barely wide enough for the bed and a single chair. A window rattled with the rising wind, and the walls held the cold from the coming storm. One lantern cast long shadows that stretched and bent as if alive. The door closed behind them with a sound that felt final, though both knew morning would come whether they wanted it or not. They kept their distance, each claiming a corner of the room, pretending the other was no more than a piece of furniture. The man set his hat on the chair, eyes alert even as his body ached for rest. The woman placed her bag beneath the bed, movement slow, careful, as if she feared making noise might break something fragile in the air. Outside, rain began to fall, light at first, then harder, drumming against the roof and the window. The storm wrapped the boarding house in its grip, cutting it off from the rest of the town. Inside that room, time stretched thin. Every sound felt louder. Every breath felt closer than it should. Silence pressed between them, not empty, but full of questions neither dared to ask. Who had they been before this night? What road had led them here? On the frontier, stories were written in scars and glances, not in easy words. Both carried passages shaped by loss, though neither knew it yet. As the night wore on, the storm worsened. A sharp crack of thunder shook the building, and the lantern flickered. In that brief moment of darkness, something shifted. The man moved without thinking, steadying the lamp before it fell. The woman let out a breath she had not known she was holding. Their eyes met for the first time, and in that look was a recognition neither expected. It was not romance, not yet. It was something quieter, something born of shared fear and shared endurance. Two people weathered by the same land, standing in the same fragile moment, the kind of understanding that does not need words. They spoke then, softly, carefully, as if the walls might be listening. Simple things at first: the road, the storm, how long the rain might last. Each sentence peeled back a small layer of distance. The man learned she was traveling alone by choice, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. She learned he was not running toward anything, only away from a past that still followed him in the dark. Hours passed, the storm showed no mercy. The room grew colder, and the lantern burned low. The bed, once a symbol of discomfort and tension, became a question neither wanted to ask, but both needed answered. The floor was too hard, the night too long. They set rules without saying them out loud: space, respect, trust, however thin. When they lay down, fully clothed, backs turned, the distance between them felt both too close and too far. Sleep came in short, broken pieces, chased by memories and the sound of rain. Sometime before dawn, a cry echoed from outside. A horse in distress, a wagon tipped by mud. The man was on his feet in an instant, reaching for his coat. The woman followed, heart racing, fear sharp and sudden. In that moment, the choice was made without discussion. They faced the danger together. By the time they reached the door, the storm had begun to ease, but something else had already changed. What started as an unwanted arrangement had become a shared stand against the night. Neither of them knew it yet, but the life they had planned before this storm was already slipping away. As they stepped into the fading rain, the first pale light of morning touched the horizon. Behind them, the small room stood empty, holding the weight of a night that would follow them far beyond this town. What they would find outside, and what it would demand of them, was still unknown. But one truth had settled deep and certain: they would not walk away from this night unchanged. The rain had softened to a steady whisper by the time they reached the edge of town, where the road dipped low and mud clung to every step. A wagon lay tilted in a shallow ditch, one wheel half buried, the horse trembling beneath soaked leather and strain. The animal's breath came hard, white in the cold air, eyes wide with fear. The man moved first, slow and calm, the way someone does when they know panic can turn small trouble into disaster. He spoke to the horse in a low voice, not with commands but with patience, as if the animal were an old friend who had lost its way. The woman stood close, holding the lantern high to give light, rainwater running down her sleeves. She watched the man's hands, sure and practiced, as he loosened the harness just enough to ease the pressure. She had seen men like him before, men shaped by work and distance, but something about the way he handled the situation told her he was not driven by pride. He worked because the work needed doing, nothing more. They freed the horse together, pushing the wagon back onto the road with effort that burned the muscles and pulled quiet groans from tired bodies. When it was done, the driver thanked them with shaking words and a promise of payment neither accepted. Out here, survival often replaced currency. The storm had taught everyone that lesson more than once. As they walked back toward the boarding house, the town felt different, quieter, as if it too had been holding its breath. The street lamps flickered, their lights stretching long across the wet ground. Neither spoke right away. The night had already stripped away some of the distance between them, and silence now felt less heavy, more thoughtful. Inside, the boarding house was still. The keeper slept behind his counter, head bowed, trusting the walls to hold until morning. Upstairs, the narrow room waited, unchanged, but the air inside felt altered, like a place that remembered what had passed through it. They shut the door softly this time, as if noise itself might undo what little balance they had found. The man leaned against the wall, finally allowing the weariness to show. His shoulders sagged, and for a moment he looked older than before, worn thin by years that had taken more than they had given back. The woman noticed, and without thinking she set the lantern down and poured water from her canteen into a cup. She offered it without words. He accepted it the same way. That small exchange opened a door neither had meant to unlock. He spoke first, not about the night, but about the land beyond the town. He described a spread of open range to the west, where cattle grazed and fences were few. He said he worked where work found him, moving with the seasons, never staying long enough to plant roots. The woman listened closely, recognizing the pattern of someone who feared standing still. When it was her turn, she shared less. She said she had come from farther east, from a place that no longer felt like home. She did not mention why she traveled alone, only that the road had been kinder than the people she left behind. Her words were careful, shaped to protect old wounds from fresh air. The lantern burned lower. Dawn crept closer, unnoticed at first. Outside, the storm clouds began to thin, and a pale line of light traced the edge of the sky. Morning would bring questions neither was ready to answer: where they would go, what this night would mean once the sun made it real. The bed remained between them, untouched since they returned. It was no longer just a place to rest, but a reminder of how close two strangers could be pushed by circumstance. The woman sat on the edge of it, folding her hands in her lap, grounding herself. The man stayed where he was, gaze fixed on the window as if the horizon might offer guidance. He asked her then where she was headed next. The question was simple, but it landed hard. She hesitated, searching for an answer that felt true. She said she had not decided yet, that the road would tell her when the time came. He nodded, understanding more than she expected. The town would wake soon. With it would come routine and noise and the return of separate lives. But beneath that certainty lay an unease that neither could ignore. This night had crossed a line neither had planned to approach. Not in action, but in meaning. Shared danger had a way of binding people together, even when they resisted. The man confessed something then, his voice low. He said he had learned long ago not to rely on anyone, that every time he had, the land had taken them away or changed them into strangers. He did not say this as a warning, but as a truth he carried like an old injury. The woman did not try to fix it. She only listened. She told him she understood more than she wished she did. That trust, once broken, made even kindness feel dangerous. Her eyes held a quiet strength, the kind earned through endurance rather than hope. In that moment they saw each other not as temporary companions of a forced night, but as people shaped by similar storms. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. Morning voices drifted upward. The world was returning, unaware of the fragile balance inside that small room. The woman stood, lifting her bag from beneath the bed. The man reached for his hat. The spell of the night was thinning, but its mark remained. They opened the door together. The hallway light spilled in, bright and ordinary. For a heartbeat, neither moved. There were things left unsaid, questions pressed back by fear of their answers. If they spoke them now, something would have to change. If they did not, something would still be lost. Downstairs, the smell of coffee rose, strong and familiar. Life offered its distractions freely. The man stepped aside to let her pass. She paused, meeting his gaze one last time. In her eyes was uncertainty, but also resolve. Whatever waited ahead, she would face it as she always had, head on. As they parted at the foot of the stairs, the weight of the night settled between them. The town did not know it, but something had begun, fragile and undefined. Whether it would grow or break under the light of day remained unseen. Outside, the sky cleared fully, revealing a wide stretch of blue over the frontier. The road waited, indifferent and endless. Both stood for a moment longer than necessary, listening to the sounds of morning, aware that the choices made next would echo far beyond this place. Neither realized that the true test of that night had not yet arrived. The storm had passed, but its consequences were only beginning to surface. Morning settled over the town with a calm that felt almost unearned. Sunlight warmed the wet boards of the street, and steam lifted from rooftops as if the night had never been there at all. The man walked toward the stable at the far end of town, his boots slow, his thoughts loud. Every step felt heavier than it should have. He told himself it was the long night, the work, the lack of sleep. Still, his mind kept circling back to the boarding-house door and the woman who had walked away without looking back. At the stable, the smell of hay and leather wrapped around him, familiar and grounding. He tended to his horse with steady hands, brushing mud from its legs, checking for strain. This was the life he understood, care for the animal, ride on, move when it was time. Yet even as he worked, he noticed how the morning felt altered, as if the land itself had shifted a few inches to the side. Across town, the woman stood near the general store, weighing her choices. Supplies were laid out before her: flour, dried beans, coffee, all the small necessities that decided how far a traveler could go. She counted her coins twice, aware that each one mattered. Her plan had been simple before last night. Keep moving, stay unnoticed, do not depend on anyone. Now that plan felt thinner than it once had. She sensed eyes on her and turned, expecting nothing, then saw him standing across the street. He had finished at the stable and was watching her without meaning to. The moment stretched, neither certain how to bridge the space daylight had returned to them. Townsfolk passed between them, unaware of the tension that lingered like a held breath. He nodded, a simple greeting. She returned it just as simple. That should have been the end of it. Instead, something pulled them closer, not with urgency, but with a slow, unavoidable draw. They met near the hitching post, careful to keep their voices low. The town began to wake fully, and with it came whispers. A few curious glances, a raised brow from the storekeeper. On the frontier, people noticed patterns quickly. A man and a woman who had shared a night under the same roof would not go unseen, no matter the truth of it. The woman felt those looks like a weight pressing at her back. She had learned the cost of rumor before. As they finished, a rider approached, dust trailing behind him. His horse was fast, well kept, and his coat bore the mark of a ranch not far from here. He dismounted with confidence, eyes sharp as they swept the street. When his gaze landed on the woman, it did not soften. It tightened. The man felt it immediately, the shift in the air. He stepped slightly closer, not in challenge but in instinct. The rider spoke her name, his voice carrying a familiarity that made her shoulders stiffen. She answered with restraint, careful not to reveal more than she had to. The rider said he had been looking for her, said there were matters left unfinished. His words were polite, but his meaning was clear. She did not belong wandering alone. There were expectations she had ignored, promises she had broken by leaving. The woman met his stare, her voice calm but firm. She said she owed nothing, that whatever agreement once existed no longer held. The rider smiled thinly, the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. He said the land remembered debts, even when people tried to forget. Townsfolk slowed their steps. Conflict drew attention like blood in water. The man beside her said nothing, but his presence spoke. He was not part of this dispute, yet he was not leaving either. The rider noticed him then, measuring him quickly, dismissing him just as fast. The rider leaned closer to the woman and lowered his voice. He warned her the road ahead was not as empty as she thought, that certain men had been asking questions, that accidents happened to those who traveled without protection. His words were coded in concern, but the threat beneath them was unmistakable. When he left, mounting his horse and riding off toward the east, the street slowly returned to motion. But the damage was done. The woman's hands trembled as she tied off her last bundle. The man watched her, anger stirring beneath his calm. He did not like bullies. He liked threats even less. They moved away from the crowd, finding a quieter stretch of road. He asked her who the rider was. She hesitated, then said he represented a past she was trying to outrun. A ranch where control mattered more than fairness, where choices were made for others and enforced with smiles and silence. She admitted she had taken something when she left, not gold or papers, but knowledge. Knowledge that could cost powerful men their standing if it reached the wrong ears. Since then, the road had been both refuge and risk. The man listened, understanding the shape of the trouble even if the details remained blurred. He had crossed paths with men like that rider before. Men who used the land and the law to bend others to their will. He knew how far they would go to protect what they claimed as theirs. He told her she should not travel alone, not with eyes watching the trail. She bristled at first, pride flaring, but fear followed close behind. She had felt it too, the sense of being followed, the way towns sometimes felt too quiet when she arrived. He offered to ride part of the way with her. Not as a savior, he made clear, but as company. Two sets of eyes were better than one. She did not answer right away. Trust did not come easily, and dependence came even harder. Before she could decide, another complication surfaced. A small group of cattlemen approached, led by a familiar face. One of them recognized the man from a previous job gone wrong. Words were exchanged, polite but strained. Old grievances surfaced, unresolved and dangerous. The man realized then that staying near the woman would draw his own trouble closer to her. His past, like hers, was not finished with him. He carried debts of a different kind, tied to land disputes and broken contracts. Trouble followed him as faithfully as his horse. They stood there, caught between separate storms that now threatened to merge. The road ahead narrowed, not by distance but by consequence. Whatever choice they made next would pull them deeper into conflict, not away from it. The woman looked west, toward open country and uncertain safety. The man looked the same way, knowing that turning back east was no longer an option for either of them. The night that had forced them into one room had bound their paths tighter than either had planned. As they prepared to leave town, the feeling of being watched returned, stronger this time. Somewhere beyond the hills, plans were being made. The land was wide, but danger had a way of finding those who tried to slip through unnoticed. Neither spoke of fear, but both felt it, and neither yet understood how deeply this conflict would test what they were willing to risk, or who they were willing to become, before it was over. They left town before the sun climbed too high, the road still damp beneath the horses' hooves. Neither spoke much as the buildings faded behind them. The silence was not awkward, only full. The land opened wide, rolling grass and distant hills stretching toward the horizon. This was where the frontier felt honest. No walls, no watching eyes, only sky and earth and whatever choices a person carried inside. The woman rode slightly ahead at first, keeping her pace steady, her posture firm. She had spent too long watching her back to fully relax, and even now her gaze scanned the trail ahead and the rise of the land on either side. The man followed close enough to help if needed, far enough to give her space. He understood that kind of caution. He had lived inside it for years. By midday, the heat settled in, heavy and slow. They stopped near a shallow creek, letting the horses drink while they ate from their small supplies. The water moved gently over stones, a sound that eased the tension if only a little. The woman washed her hands, staring at the current as if it might carry her thoughts away. The man watched the hills behind them, uneasy without knowing why. It was there she spoke again of the rider, filling in more of the story she had only hinted at before. She told him about the ranch, how power there was held quietly but firmly, how men decided the future of others with smiles and contracts that never felt like choices. She had worked there, learned things she was never meant to hear, seen records that proved land had been taken through lies and threats. When she left, she carried those truths with her, written and memorized, enough to ruin reputations if exposed. The man listened, jaw tightening. He had seen similar things play out across the frontier. Land disputes turned violent, people disappearing, justice bending to money and influence. He asked why she had not gone straight to the authorities. She gave a small, bitter smile and said the law often rode with the highest bidder. They mounted again, riding west as clouds began to gather, thin at first, then darker. The trail narrowed, winding through low hills where sightlines shortened and echoes carried strangely. It was here the feeling of being followed became undeniable. A sound behind them, faint but steady. Hoofbeats, careful and measured. The man slowed his horse slightly, letting the woman draw even. He did not look back right away. Panic would only make things worse. He told her quietly to keep her pace, to watch the ridge to the south. She nodded, her hand tightening on the reins. The sound faded, then returned, closer. A shape appeared briefly on a rise, then vanished again. Someone was testing them, gauging their awareness. The woman's heart hammered, but she kept her seat steady. She had known this moment might come. Knowing it did not make it easier. They pushed on until the land opened again, revealing an old-line shack near a stand of trees. The roof sagged, but the walls still stood. It was not much, but it offered cover and a chance to think. They dismounted quickly, leading the horses inside and barring the door as best they could. Inside, dust coated everything. A broken table leaned against the wall. Light filtered through cracks in the boards. The man checked the perimeter, counting exits, listening. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying distant thunder. Another storm was building, mirroring the one rising between them and those on their trail. They did not need to say it aloud. They were being hunted, not openly yet, but with intent. The rider from town had not been alone in his concern. Others had been sent, men paid to retrieve what the woman carried in her memory and silence her if retrieval failed. The man suggested waiting until nightfall, using darkness to slip away. The woman shook her head. The land here was too open. They would be tracked easily. She believed the only chance lay in reaching a larger settlement west, a place where witnesses and noise made quiet threats harder to hide. As they argued their options, a shot rang out, striking the side of the shack. Wood splintered. The horses reared, snorting in fear. The message was clear. They had been found. The man moved without hesitation, calming the animals, positioning himself near the door. He did not return fire. Escalation would only trap them. Instead, he watched for movement, counting breaths, waiting for a mistake. Another shot came, closer this time, followed by a voice calling out. The words were polite, almost friendly. They were asked to come out, promises were made. No one needed to get hurt, just a conversation. The woman's face hardened. She whispered that this was how it always started. The man met her gaze, seeing fear there, but also resolve. She was done running without fighting back in her own way. They waited, minutes stretched thin. The storm broke then, rain slamming down, turning the ground slick and noisy. Visibility dropped. The man saw opportunity where others might see only danger. He whispered a plan, simple but risky. Use the storm, create confusion, separate the pursuers from each other? The woman listened, then nodded. Trust passed between them, not as a promise, but as necessity. When the next voice called out, closer now, the man kicked open the back wall where rot had weakened the boards. They moved fast, leading the horses out into the rain, circling wide. Thunder cracked overhead, masking sound and sight. Shots followed, wild and uncertain. Shadows moved through the downpour. The land became chaos, mud and noise and fear tangled together. The woman rode hard, heart pounding, knowing one mistake could end everything. They split briefly, then regrouped beyond the trees, breathless but alive. Behind them, shouts rose, confused and angry. The storm had worked in their favor, but only for now. As night fell, they pressed on, exhaustion dragging at them. The man's horse stumbled once, recovered. The woman reached out instinctively, steadying him. That small touch carried more weight than words. They were no longer two travelers sharing a road by chance. Their fates had crossed fully, bound by danger and choice. In the distance, lights appeared, faint but real. A settlement, hope stirred, fragile and bright. Yet between them and that promise lay miles of exposed ground and men who would not give up easily. Behind them, the storm eased, leaving an uneasy calm. The pursuit would resume with clearer heads and fresh plans. Ahead safety waited, but so did the final reckoning. They rode on, knowing the next hours would decide everything. And though fear rode with them, so did something else now. Determination, shared and unspoken, pushing them forward toward a future neither had dared imagine before that forced night under one roof. The lights ahead grew brighter as they rode, each step forward pulling them closer to noise, people, and the kind of safety that came from being seen. By the time they reached the edge of the settlement, dawn was already pushing back the last of the night. The town was larger than the last one, built around a rail stop and a busy trading post. Wagons lined the road and voices carried through the cool air. Life moved early here, leaving little room for quiet threats. They slowed their horses, exhaustion finally catching up. Mud streaked their clothes and their faces showed the strain of the long ride. Still, they did not stop until they reached the center of town, where a group of men were unloading crates near the station. The woman slid from her horse first, legs unsteady but strong enough to hold. The man followed, staying close, his eyes scanning every face. Word spread quickly when strangers arrived looking like they had outrun trouble. Questions came, cautious at first, then sharper when the woman asked for the local marshal. Someone pointed toward a brick building near the tracks. She did not hesitate. The man walked beside her, aware that this step would change everything. Inside the marshal's office, the air smelled of ink and old paper. The marshal listened as the woman spoke, her voice clear despite the weight of what she carried. She laid out the truth she had protected for so long. How land had been taken through forged records, how workers had been silenced, how threats had followed her across towns. She recited details only someone close to the operation could know, names, dates, transactions hidden behind friendly agreements. The man added what he had seen and heard, confirming the rider from town and the men who had followed them. He spoke calmly, without exaggeration. His steady presence gave weight to her words. The marshal's expression darkened as the story unfolded. This was not the first time such claims had crossed his desk, but it was the first time someone had brought them with this much clarity. By midday, riders were sent out, not to chase, but to summon witnesses and secure records. The rail office provided copies of shipping logs that matched the woman's account. A storekeeper recognized the rider she described and admitted he had been paid to keep quiet. Piece by piece, the truth took shape, solid and undeniable. The men who had followed them did not appear again. Whether they turned back or faded into the land did not matter anymore. Their power depended on shadows, and shadows could not survive here. By evening, word reached the settlement that the ranch east of town was under investigation. The frontier moved slowly, but when it moved, it did not forget. The woman sat outside the marshal's office as the sun lowered, the long day finally catching her breath. For the first time in months, she felt the tight knot in her chest begin to loosen. The man joined her, offering water. They sat in silence, watching the light change on the tracks. She thanked him then, not just for the ride or the protection, but for believing her when it mattered. He shrugged it off at first, uncomfortable with praise, then admitted that standing beside her had reminded him of something he thought he had lost. Purpose, maybe. Or the simple rightness of choosing to stay when walking away would have been easier. They found work in town over the next few days, waiting as the matter unfolded. The woman helped at the trading post, her sharp mind and steady hands quickly earning trust. The man took on work at the rail yard, moving freight, fixing fences, doing what needed doing. Nights were quieter now, no shots in the dark, no whispered threats. As the week passed, news came that the ranch owner had fled, leaving behind records that confirmed everything she had said. Land would be returned, workers compensated. The damage could not be undone, but it could be answered. The woman listened to the news without triumph. Justice, she had learned, was not loud. It simply arrived and stayed. One evening, as they walked along the edge of town, the man asked her what she planned to do next. The road no longer pulled at her the way it once had. She said she was not sure. For the first time, uncertainty felt like freedom rather than danger. He told her he had been offered steady work nearby, helping oversee a stretch of land that needed rebuilding after years of neglect. It was honest work, rooted work. He said it without expectation, simply sharing a possibility. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not a man running anymore, but one choosing where to stand. They talked long into the evening, about the future and the past, about the cost of the road and the quiet strength of staying. There were no promises made, no grand declarations. Just an understanding that whatever came next, they would face it with open eyes. Weeks later, the settlement felt less like a stopping point and more like a beginning. The woman moved into a small room near the market, no longer a stranger passing through. The man rented a place nearby, close enough that paths crossed easily. Often, shared meals became routine. Laughter found its way back into conversations. Sometimes, they spoke of that first night, the forced sharing of a single room that had changed everything. They marveled at how chance and hardship had woven their lives together. On the frontier, survival often depended on timing. Meaning they learned came from what one did with it. The land around them healed slowly, just as people did. Fences were rebuilt, fields reclaimed. Trust restored in small, careful steps. The woman began teaching others how to read records, how to protect themselves from quiet theft. The man became known for fairness, for stepping in when things leaned toward injustice. One afternoon, as they stood watching the sun dip low, the woman reached for his hand. The gesture was simple, unguarded. He took it without hesitation. The road that had once defined them now lay behind, not forgotten but no longer ruling their days. They had been forced to share a room for one night, pushed together by weather and fate. What followed had not been easy. It had tested courage, trust, and the will to stand against what was wrong. But from that night came a partnership built on choice rather than necessity. As the town settled into evening and the stars appeared one by one, they stood side by side, no longer strangers, no longer running. The frontier stretched on, wide and uncertain, but they faced it together, changed forever by the night that had given them a future they never expected.